following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man in Alameda, California. Living through a power outage this morning. My guest had to come back. He's David Hubler, one of the most interesting guys on the planet and a member of the Comfortably Zoned Network. Welcome, David. I'm going to stop this wonderful introduction before it gets out of hand.
I'll be embarrassed. Go ahead.
Don't be. You live up to it every day. Have been a big part of this network on the Hal Box show, where we go back and talk about old-time sports from Madison Square Garden. We got you're on Bronx Roots, where we talk about our upbringing. It's really terrific having you, and we're going to have a good show this morning. What is it that inspired you? We communicate on Facebook, and we talk a lot about politics and what's going on. What inspired you when I posted the possibility of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren hooking up on the Democratic ticket? What inspired you to say that that's an automatic loser? I'm just curious.
Well, I didn't say automatic, but it certainly seems like the problem with them is, first of all, we have the age problem of Bernie. We have the sex problem of Elizabeth Warren. I think Warren is a terrific candidate, by the way. I think she's very, very bright, articulate, and certainly knows her stuff. But the Republican machine will drown them out in all sorts of stories. They're ripe for stories. Bernie's already been tagged as, socialist. Well, he is a socialist, but what he's tagged with is not what his socialism is compared to what Trump and the Republicans would label him as a socialist, quote, communist. It's just too far to the left. That's my thinking, and so
okay.
And I just feel they'd be stacking the deck against themselves.
Well, if you had your druthers, who would you pick as a 1-2 punch?
I'm not really sure. I'm beginning to like Buttigieg somewhat. I think he's too young. I mean, you don't go from a mayor of a Midwest, not small town, but mid-sized town, let's say, into the presidency. That's the big rap on him. It's not that he's never held political office before. He does. I mean, Trump has not held any political office before either.
Any whatsoever, let alone
mayor.
Or...
Right, exactly. Nothing at all. So that's not the issue. So I don't know. I mean, I'm a little disappointed that the Democrats haven't come up with a governor. I thought at one point Governor Cuomo of New York would make a good candidate, but I apparently not. He either didn't want it or whatever. And there are a couple of other governors around the country who could. In fact, a couple of them actually were running and had already dropped out. But I mean, some of the bigger name governors and senators usually do well in presidential election. They may not win, but they will win the party's nomination. And so there are a couple, and there's some other senators besides Bernie and Elizabeth who could fill the bill in a more Midwest-oriented. I think that's part of the reason Hillary lost is because not only did she ignore Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, but those three states which normally were Democratic have ignored her, so to speak, in 2016 because she never showed up there, and it was just enough of a turnaround to do the trick. Politics is such a crazy game. I used to think that had what's his name, Senator McCain, had John McCain won, and he was considered old at the time too, and he died in office, we would have had that wacko from Alaska as president. I mean, that's yeah, God forbid. So I mean, these are the crazy things that can happen in politics. So I'm never overly optimistic, and I'm never overly pessimistic, and it's certainly too soon. It's too soon to say anything really about what's going to happen next year. I mean,
okay. Before I ask you what you think the end game of the Trump administration will be, I want to call attention to a name that you just mentioned. That's Cuomo, and I think you were talking about the late governor's son.
Yes,
but
because he's governor now.
Right, he is, and his that kid's brother, the governor's brother, is a terrific newscaster on CNN. He's
a very good interviewer too. Yeah, and he doesn't he doesn't take any crap from his interviewees. He comes right back and says, "Well, no, that's not right." And a lot of these, a lot of these on-air people just let some of these things go by the board.
The interview that he did with Giuliani a week or so ago, when he got him to totally lie, he didn't get him. He identified a total lie within a paragraph of talking, and he says, "You just said that. What are you saying?"
That's right.
He really called him on it.
Yeah.
But maybe you can, when Cuomo Sr. was governor, he was called upon, or at least his name was bandied about in presidential nominations. Do you have any idea why that never came to fruition? There were rumors that he had skeletons in his closet, I recall.
Yeah, that's right. I recall the same thing. I don't know.
What were those skeletons?
It was still in the closet. I don't know.
Still there. And when you said that his son, I had never heard overtures towards his son, an equally competent, liberal, good man, the way I see it, not picking up on it. And I thought, well, that's what a loss to us that he's not at least being considered. There are some that are up there on those 12, 15 people that at this point it's ridiculous. They need to band together and support one person quickly, because this one there's no second guessing. If we lose to Trump in the second election, and he's got no one to be accountable for in terms of having to impress anybody for re-election at that point, I think we're a doomed society.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I think there'll be a tremendous amount of damage done further, and it would be horrible to have to think about that prospect now, even at this date. I don't know. I don't know what happened to Governor Cuomo. He, at one point, I think he was entertaining a run for the presidency, and has backed off for whatever reason. I don't even know if he's even given a reason. I don't really follow New York politics that closely. he certainly would have been a good, strong candidate. You know, there was a time when candidates from New York, Virginia, were very, very strong candidates. Right in that northeast corridor, you could even put Eisenhower in that from he was living in Pennsylvania at the time. So there, and on the West Coast, of course, you had some good, strong candidates who could win too. But that New York East Coast area, Boston, we had
the Kennedys.
Yeah, of course, the Kennedys, and even what's his name, who was Senator Muskie, was a viable candidate.
Back in the day, there was Rockefeller was for New
Rockefeller.
York.
You're right, absolutely. I forgot about Rockefeller for a moment. He made it to VP, and that was the end. But you know. And of course, the idea was in those days, you'd find somebody from the East Coast for the presidency, and you'd balance it with balance was the operative word. Balance it with a VP candidate from the West or from the South to try to keep the party and the American electorate on one page and rack up electoral college votes. So, but that's not the way it is anymore.
Okay. You mentioned Miss Harris. Can she stand up to Trump? The Pocahontas thing?
Yeah. Well, see, there you go. Right away. That's the first thing. They're very good at creating these myths, or at least false images, and Pocahontas is one of them. I mean, she made a mistake, or maybe she thought she was being honest. She wasn't trying to lie about it. Why would anyone?
I don't think she ever got a job as a result of it.
No, not at all. I thought she just thought it's like that stuff you get in now with Ancestry.com. Whoa, I didn't realize I was part Lithuanian or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's all it was.
Funny story about that. I have a first cousin. His name is Michael, and Michael did one of those things, and it turned out he had some Nigerian blood in him. And Tally and I talked about my getting one, and just seeing if I wasn't indeed a Nigerian prince. We had this running
then
thing.
The FBI would be after you for the FBI would be after you for those sham contact. You've won $200 million, but I need $30,000 from you to unlock the gate or the vault.
They'd be blaming me. They'd be coming to
They'd be
my
blaming
door.
you. Absolutely.
I had 1/8 percentage.
Yeah.
Turns out I did one. I'm 100% Jewish. Everybody hates me. It's okay. It's 100.
Did you do it?
100%.
Did you? Because I've been thinking of doing that. Of going through
I did it. Ancestors.com or Ancestors, whatever it was.
Ancestry.
Michael did a different one, but it turns out that he wasn't exactly 100%, but I wasn't Nigerian after all. So that's the good news and the bad news. But it gave me it was nice having it done, really, and it did give me an idea. They show you a map where your ancestors actually come from, how many of them have migrated from where.
Yeah. That was what I was curious about, because on my father's side, everybody on my father's side was very, very secretive, and they were very. There wasn't much warmth there among my father's the three brothers, and especially with their older sister. There was never any real connection there. And I know my grandparents paternal grandparents' first names, and I did find a slight listing, what I thought was him coming across on the boat, but that wasn't confirmed. And the only other living relative on that side is my cousin, Jack, who's a bit older than I am, and he doesn't know any more than I do. So I was thinking of just finding a little bit about that. They were strange people. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. And
yeah.
What does Norm MacDonald say? He says he comes from a long line of folks who are all dead. He says he goes back. His grandfather's dead. His great-grandfather's dead.
Yeah.
He runs in the family.
Right.
Norm MacDonald.
Yeah. It's a good line. It's a good line. But
just as an offshoot, Norm MacDonald is an eclectic guy. He's a mixture of a lot of things, but he is very, very funny, profound guy. He's just weird. I've been listening to a lot of his interviews, and I really am enamored by his mind. Just an example of that was just an example of how he goes. There's some geniuses out there, and as a comedy writer, I came across something on Facebook. I didn't remember that you had written that children's book.
Yeah, I also did a lampoon book on the Reagan administration. That's a funny story. I wrote this book. It was called The Politician's Health, Diet, and Sex Guide. And the publisher was a New York publisher. And he'd call periodically, and he'd say, I need another 4 pages. We're going to extend it. And, anyone who's ever written comedy knows that you can't just write to a page count. And you can't keep
a word count.
Extending.
I need more words.
Yeah, well, that's what they wanted. So, and I had some funny reactions to that book. This was, as I said, during the Reagan administration, and I was being interviewed on the air by a state. This is an example of why the Warren ticket we were talking about before would not go, although Colorado has become pretty much Democratic. But I was being interviewed on Denver radio station for the book, and the guy was saying, it's really a funny book. He said, what do you think is one of the funniest parts? And I said, well, as I was writing it, I thought, Nancy Reagan. I said, and if you recall, at one point there were a lot of these products that you just dropped this plastic bag in boiling water, and it made soup, or it made a steak dinner, or made whatever.
Yes.
So I said, well, she's really getting good at cooking now. She can actually put that bag of water, plastic bag, in boiling water and not burn her fingertips. And so. And so somebody called in the station. How can you talk about the first lady like that? That's disgraceful. And he said the board lit up with all sorts of complaints. But that was a book that I really enjoyed writing, of course, and I thought was very funny. And the American Booksellers Association is holding its annual convention here in Washington. So I said to the publisher, I'll be here. I'll be there at the thing. Let's promote it. Let's promote the book. It was an election year. Let's do something. Well, I don't know. So I get over to the floor there where his booth is, not a large booth like Simon & Schuster or Random House, but anyway, it's there. And what he is promoting, instead of my book about politics in D.C., in an presidential election year in D.C., he's promoting another book on his list, which was called, and I'll never forget this, it was called Gifts from the Garbage, okay? Gifts from the Garbage was a book written by some... Yeah, and that's the book. Gifts from the Garbage was a book about what you can make out of old those cardboard egg crates. I mean, all sorts of nutty little things. Nothing that was worth creating. And to top it off, he had a big garbage pail there. And it had a sign, "Gifts from the Garbage." Now they weren't giving away copies of the book, so and the garbage pail was filled with garbage. So people coming by, and instead of looking at the book and doing, they threw their garbage in there. in his car, and I mean, it was just a fiasco. The whole thing was a terrible. Talk about marketing and not knowing how to market a product. That was a clear example of in fact, we were at the book show. My son got O'Neill, Tim O'Neill's autograph on the book.
Oh, wow.
And O'Neill is of course featured in the book too. It's a nonpartisan, but most of the stuff. So he got his autograph on the book. But that thing with Gifts from the Garbage, I'll never forget.
Yes.
But the book was
funny. Puts it all into perspective. You're thinking, how many years did you spend writing it and creating it?
Well, yeah, I mean,
out every sentence, and they put up a book, Gifts from the Garbage.
Now, the thing was, it was an illustrated book, and interestingly enough, how these things turn around. The book was illustrated. This is a low-budget deal. The book was illustrated by a 16-year-old kid living in New Jersey who was very, very good at caricatures. And now I was originally going to be a cartoonist, and I was really good at cartooning. The one thing I could never do was caricatures. I just couldn't get I could copy somebody else's caricature of a president or something, but I couldn't do it myself. And so this 16-year-old kid they hired, and I understand the publisher sort of pulled a trump on him and didn't want to pay him at the end. But later on, years later, this no longer 16-year-old kid was the chief political correspondent for Fox News, based here in Washington. And I ran into him at a Nats game, actually, early on, because my buddy who worked for VOA, when I was at VOA, the two of them had worked in the White House together as correspondents. So I met him, and he finally left Fox for some unknown reason. And that was the last I heard of him. But it was interesting that he came back and he was actually in the media. But
how did you find him as a kid? When he was a kid?
I didn't. The publisher did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and as I said, at that time I never met him. But my VOA buddy was telling me that when they'd go on these press flights with the president, he spent a lot of his time doing caricatures of the other correspondents on the flight, and he was really good at it. So yeah, he's become very good, and maybe he's gone into art now instead of writing.
Yeah, that in itself has all the makings of an illustrated book.
Yeah, that's right.
A trip with the president.
Yeah,
what the inside of
Air Force One,
the vehicle looks like, that kind of thing.
Well, my buddy from VOA told me he was on one flight on Air Force One where they showed the movie Air Force One. How's that for? Yeah.
That's a good one.
And he said, if you saw the movie, the president ejects on this little pod thing in the movie, and my buddy Dave said, there is no pod on Air Force One.
No, there's a pod on Air Force One, I'll tell you that, at this point.
So that's a long way.
Anyway,
That's a long way for me to plug the politician's health guide and sex guide.
all right, I'm going to look for that because I thought, having lived through it as an outsider, naturally, the Reagan administration was funny in not a funny way, but it had a lot of humor, if you know what I mean. There was a lot you could call on. Did you mention the astrologist?
I don't think so. At that point, I don't think it had been revealed.
Oh.
Yeah, but there was a good deal about Nancy Reagan in there, and Tip O'Neill, and some of the other players of that. Yeah, well, one thing about I just did a piece another plug. As part of my duties at the American Public University System, I write articles for some of the blogs, and I did a piece on the last presidential primary we just had, and this was a promo for it, or scene setter, as they call them, to publish the day before, and I wrote about how the Reagan Jimmy Carter and the Nixon Kennedy debates actually were the beginnings of the need to create a public image on these debates. Prior to the Kennedy-Nixon debate, there were no real TV debates. There weren't. Eisenhower had a couple of press conferences that were televised, but they didn't do debates. Nixon Kennedy was like the first, and so I wrote this article about how they created public personas on these shows, and this was very interesting because nobody really knew about it. One of the guys I worked with had his previous life he had been a bigwig at one of the media companies. Reagan brought a lot of media people from California into the administration, and this guy had been in, I think he'd been in radio for a good number of years. Anyway, he told me this story. He was with Reagan when Reagan and Jimmy Carter had their first TV debate, and he said as he saw they were miking President Carter, what they did was they put a microphone on like his chest or something, but they ran the cable down through his, instead of going, they ran the cable down through his pants leg and then down onto the floor where they taped it. If you've ever been to one of these press things, you know that a lot of the mics and the cables are taped down to the floor so nobody trips over these things and knocks out the circuit. So they did that, and the guy I was with, worked with, what they did was they put they just put a lavalier mic, which just clips onto a collar or a shirt collar, and then they ran it down outside the leg, just down the suit jacket and out. And when the debate was over, Carter was immobile. He had to stand there because he was all, taped to the ground. Yeah, hooked up and taped to the ground. So Reagan unclipped his lavalier mic, and he walked over to Carter and with his hand extended, and he shook Carter's hand and smiled, and the audience reaction was such, not the audience so far in the theater, but the audience that was watching around the world, especially in the U.S. It was interesting because they did a post-mortem on this. The people who listened to the debate on the radio called it either a tie or they gave the win to Carter. The people who watched it on TV overwhelmingly gave the win to Reagan, and many of them said because he was more personable and more conciliatory, shaking hands. So it was interesting.
If I'm not mistaken, the same held true on the Kennedy-Nixon debate. I think Nixon won the debate on the radio, and Kennedy won it on television.
Well, that too. There was a lot of That's right. There was a lot of, and that's part of the story I wrote too. Was that Nixon had prepared badly. He came into the studio. He was sick. He had like a flu. The makeup they put on him was terrible. And they, in 1960, TV was still in its infancy, really, and they both appeared under these very hot Klieg lights. And Nixon, being Nixon, he began to perspire profusely, and they had tried to cover up his, 5 o'clock shadow that Nixon always had. They tried to cover up that with makeup. So the makeup began to run because of the perspiration. It was a terror, and the set was just this plain nothing. If you saw a picture of it, there was nothing, just a wall. And Nixon's suit blended in with the wall, so he looked terrible. Kennedy, on the other hand, had spent the last 2 or 3 days at a hotel in Chicago. Nixon just sort of flew in for the debate from Washington, and Kennedy had spent the 3 days holed up with his advisors, going over things, preparing for the debate, and of course, and he looked better. He was young John Kennedy, and so he came across much better on TV than Nixon did.
I recently saw a CNN documentary called Tricky Dick, and it really captured what this man was about. He was evil, and it showed on his face. He had those looks, his eyes. He was
he was paranoid. He really had, everybody was his enemy,
darting eyes around the room, like who's going to get me now?
That's why he had his enemies list and things like that.
Okay, so the magic question, how do you see the end of Trump? How do you see it turning out? Will he be impeached? Will he be impeached and they'll lose in the Senate? They won't be able to impeach him. And will he gain traction from that with his supporters?
I think at this point, there's a quote that I can't come up with immediately from Hamlet, but about being in so far that you can't go back. I don't have the exact words, but I think that's where this impeachment proceeding stands. They can't not prepare a bill of indictment for impeachment at this point. I don't believe they can.
Well, he stood out on the White House lawn and confessed to it.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean, he's right.
Should it be more simple than that? Could it be any more simple than that? Well, the man said basically that he offered military support that was approved by Congress, money, blah, 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 in return for, he called quid pro this.
There was no quid pro quo. He kept saying no quid pro. But what's his name? His acting chief of staff the other day, clearly at that press conference, said it was sure, that's what we always do in politics, quid pro quo.
Right.
And then he had to walk it. Yeah, get over it. Then he had to walk it back. But it still means, all of this stuff has to be done legally. So they have to prepare this bill of indictment, and they have to cross their T's and dot their I's on how many articles of impeachment there will be. So they just can't say, okay, we're going to impeach you and do it. They have to prepare all of these legalese things, and it takes a while to do that. But I think at this point, the Democrats would look terrible if they just said, no, we're not going to do it. So I think they have to go through with it. And I think that his Republican stalwarts and sycophants in the Senate will give him a pass on it. The outcome of that is still undetermined because there's a lot of independents now who think, yeah, he should be impeached. And if he's impeached and not convicted, then they'll know who to blame for that. So
right, it'll come back at them on their election.
Yes,
day.
and I think too that with out there was almost 3 million votes that Trump did not get, that Hillary Clinton did get. Those 3 million are still out there, maybe more now. So that's why it's so important to pick candidates for president and vice president on the Democratic side who are not seen as just Eastern liberals, which is what you've got in Warren and Bernie Sanders. They couldn't be too close together. We talked earlier about the balance of the ticket between East and West, North and South, but you've got Bernie from Vermont and what's Trump and Warren from Massachusetts. That's a little too close. That's the definition of East Coast liberal elites. So it's
I know,
too
but
close.
are they all that liberal, or are they no more than FDR?
Well, times have changed, and they may not nearly. The platform that they have put forward is, yes, it's very, very liberal. The American people, I believe, are still not really in favor of a government-run Medicare system for all. I think I forget.
Well, the one they have working isn't working. The one they have in place isn't working.
Well, it works for the people who are in it, pretty much now. Now that they got a lot of the bugs out, you won't hear that from the Republicans.
Well, they don't have the high deductible. How about the deductibles? People are going bankrupt over medical bills.
But not the ones that are in the program. This is what now Virginia here for years because it's been run by a Republican House and Senate. Refused to do anything. There's about 400,000 people in Southwest Virginia, which is like coal country, Appalachia, that sort of area. 400,000 people who had no health insurance whatsoever because they couldn't afford it, and they were working for companies that didn't give you health insurance. So where were you going to get it from? Finally, in the last administration, under a totally Democratic controlled House, the House of and they got it passed through the House and the Senate by about one vote. But those 400,000 people are now covered by insurance. That's a big win. I mean, 400,000 is a lot of people to suddenly find they have health insurance.
And they can get preventative medicine.
Yes,
life extension.
Sure, and it's all under the ACA, Obamacare. So and these huge premiums that the Republicans were talking about have come down. They've come down a bit. I'm not so much. I don't think having lived in England for 4 years where they have socialized medicine under the national health system, I was really in favor. I thought it was a wonderful system. You had to wait a while if you had an illness that wasn't serious, but the point was no one. And my wife's relatives there brought that home to me because one of them was getting a very serious operation soon. No one there would ever go bankrupt because of medical bills. Just think about that. No one would ever go bankrupt.
That's a blessing.
And now, sure, it works there because they have 50 million people in the whole country. That's less than there are in California, I think. So a state could do it, but the U.S. 350 million people, with all sorts of different, political persuasions and ideas and things, it would be very hard to do that. So I don't think that I think the best I think the solution that really works is who was it? Which candidate? I forget. That it's there if you want it. If you want to keep your employee health care, keep that. A third option, so to speak. That to me seems, because a lot of people who work for part-time work, they don't get any health insurance at all. That's where something like this would really benefit. I don't understand.
It ends up being corporate welfare, where these corporations aren't paying their employees enough to keep benefits.
Yeah, but they have to pay something, I think. They have to collect the payments. But what I'm saying is it's such an antithetical thought to people like myself and you who think, no, why should we give these people health insurance? Why should we care if they get sick? That seems to be the hardline right wing. Screw them.
Well,
if they're not
because
smart
if
enough,
they get sick with diseases that are transmittable,
of course,
their kids could get those diseases.
And of course, hospitals have to take patients even if they can't afford to pay for them. So somebody's got to pay for them, and so it raises rates for everybody. There's so little thought given to just on the humanitarian side. I mean,
I was going to say compassionate. Well,
yeah.
What do you think? Well, should people have it? They can't afford it, so why should they have it?
Right.
Well, the kids, for instance, don't have the opportunity to go out and supplement the family income. So why should they be? They're brought into the world with the idea that some of them are here because their parents didn't have a choice to have them. So you got to take care of them as a society. You bring them into the world because you won't let the parents. People don't know the difference between a fetus and a baby and stuff like that. And then you bring them into the world and ignore them. It's a crazy society.
It has gotten worse. It has gotten worse. I mean, when I was researching the Nats and the Grays, there were a lot of things that reminded me so much of today's issues. Guess which party was against creating the GI Bill of Rights, for example? Socialism, communism. And and then of course when Congress passed the law that created gas rationing, guess who was absolved of having to pay attention to the law? Congress.
Oh. They have inside trading. Inside trading goes on in Congress. It's perfectly legal for them.
Well, no, it's not legal anymore. It was at one point. It's not legal anymore. They did clamp down on that. Yeah, they did stop that because it was becoming a runaway horse. But the idea that we're going to tell everybody in America how much gas they can get on a monthly basis, but it doesn't apply to us.
Right.
And of course, they were after Roosevelt, for being a socialist, and this patrician icon of New York State, going back to the old Dutch settlers, and they're calling him a communist. So it was very interesting how all of this stuff comes around and around.
Well, we've gotten to the point where a president of the United States can call out American citizens who are Congress people and tell them to go back where they came from.
Yeah. Interesting little side note on that. Elijah Cummings died last week, and he's been he's been a thorn in Trump's side. There has been no official word from the White House. No condolences, nothing. that I have seen. I should preface it by saying that I have seen, but I usually scan this stuff pretty carefully, and I have not seen one word of condolence at all. The flag was half-staff at the Capitol. I don't know whether it's been half-staff at the White House or they've whether we've got any kind of official days of mourning with the flag at half-staff around the country yet. Haven't seen it.
That's horrible.
Yeah, I know. But that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
I want a little balance on the Comfortably Zoned network. I'm not a big Jimmy Carter fan, and I've noted that on Facebook, on the site, and what have you. You have a different view on him and his life. Tell me about the Jimmy Carter that you know and what he was like from your perspective.
Well, I didn't know him really personally. I did
know of.
Yeah, well, I did have two very slight, I wouldn't call them run-ins. I asked him when he was running for re-election, and if you recall, Robert F. Kennedy was a second-party candidate who was running against Carter for the nomination. And I was at a press conference, and I asked Carter if Kennedy wins the primary and is the candidate, will you support him? And you know that old saying, if looks could kill? he gave me some.
I've been married.
Yeah, and gave me a sort of a nondescript answer, neither yes nor no. But you could tell he was not happy about the question. He's one of these. I think he meant to do right. He meant to do right. He tried to push human rights. Maybe pushed it a little too hard in some places. He was trapped by the Iranian Revolution. That got was a terrible thing. He could never. And the Iranians let the embassy people go the day that Reagan was inaugurated at the 12 noon on June 20th.
That was
89.
A slap in the face.
Sure it was. It absolutely was. But look at this guy. He's 95 years old now, and he's still out there building houses and home for Habitat for whatever they call it, Habitat for Humanity. That's it. And he's still a good man at heart. He's made a few enemies, of course, along the way. What politician hasn't? But and I'm not so sure of some of his positions. But you got to give the guy credit. I mean, he hasn't just faded away into the woodwork down there in Plains, Georgia. He's still active, still around. I admire him for that. And people who say he wasn't bright. This guy got an engineering degree from the Naval Academy. You have to be pretty good to get an engineering degree from anywhere. But from the Naval Academy, because he served on I think atomic submarines. That was his specialty. So he was no dope. It is no dope, I should say.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the entire family Carter got a bad rap by his entire family being around him. His mother was...
but she was a character. She was a real character.
A character, but she didn't exude intellectualism.
No, she didn't. No. Billy didn't either. Billy Beer.
Right.
Was
Billy Beer, right.
I think I still have a bottle of Billy Beer in the refrigerator downstairs.
Well, depending on the election, you may have to go to it.
Yeah. It's my bottle of Dom Perignon.
Yeah, you mix them together just to get a little buzz.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm glad you clarified Jimmy Carter a little bit.
He lost.
wasn't.
He lost because of circumstances that he couldn't control. He also lost, like I said, because as I forget the name of it, he was a very popular nightclub entertainer here in D.C. Was on several local shows. Really a funny guy, and he said, Ronald Reagan isn't our president; he's our genial host. And it was true. He had all. He just captivated. The media was his element. You couldn't take that away from the guy. Going back to doing baseball games on radio,
recreating baseball.
Yeah,
he was Dutch. He would learn the lines.
That's right,
and he was perfectly capable, grade B actor.
But that's the point you made. You made a good point, Ralph. His acting career, he was never the villain. He was always the good guy. So subliminally, when he ran for president, hey, he's a good guy. He's a good guy.
Right.
I mean, a couple of his movies are pretty good, I thought. King's Row, where he loses his legs, and he says, "Where's the rest of me?" Classic line.
Yes. Yeah. And he did the baseball movie. He played.
Grover Cleveland Alexander. No, that was a football movie.
That was the football one.
Yeah, but in baseball, I think it was Grover Cleveland Alexander. I think it was called The Pride of St. Louis or something. Yeah. And he was a pretty good athlete. There's no question about it.
No, I think that was Lindbergh with The Pride of St. Louis.
No. Maybe, well, that would have been. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway,
how about this? The Pride of David Hubler.
Yeah. Right.
That'll do. This has been a terrific podcast. Thank you, my friend.
Okay. Next time we'll talk about the old-time things that we were going to talk about today. That's all right.
If you want to talk about anything and keep it going for a while,
I've got things. Yeah, I still have to go out and do some errands and things, and it's getting late here on the East Coast.
Well, let's do a part B next week, and we'll invite Michael to join us.
Yeah, I think if we set a time, he'll be good. Yep. Okay, that'll be good.
Good. Later in the day.
Okay. Take care, Ralph.
Beautiful. Take care. Thank you for listening, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Network. I'm blessed. David Hubler. Adios. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.